As Andy says, I've had a contact with him for a year or so, but before that I'd had dealings with Tim Dayton, who some of you will know, who lives in Dent and who trains for Institute for Outdoor Learning. And we have some land at Dent, my wife and I, which we let the outdoor learning people use to do some training on. And we have big family camps there during the music festival period at Dent, so we've got a resource which I'll refer back to later on. So I'm fascinated by this whole area. I stumbled on it, the sector, by chance because of Tim Dayton. But in a sense, my interest in this whole area of outdoor activity is in the blood. My mother was a cub mistress and my father was a scoutmaster, and that's how they met. You know, in the early 1930s, and for their honeymoon they cycled on a tandem from Liverpool down to the West Country, staying in youth hostels. So, interesting concept for a honeymoon, which is what they did. And of course, I was in the Scouts myself, as most of the family have been in the Guides and so on. But I want to say a bit more about that a bit later on. First, a bit about public health. The definition which is most commonly quoted about public health these days comes from Charles Winslow, who was the founder of Yale School of Public Health in about 1916. And Winslow described public health as the science and art of protecting and improving health and treating disease through the organised efforts of society. Not about hospitals and doctors and nurses, but the organised efforts of society to protect and improve health and treat disease. So it's a whole system, it's very inclusive. On the other hand, if you go back to William Morris, who was writing towards the end of the 19th century, William Morris's definition is very interesting. 1884, William Morris said, "At least I know this, that if a person is overworked in any degree, they cannot enjoy the sort of health I'm speaking of, nor if they are continually chained to one dull round of mechanical work with no hope at the other end of it, nor if they live in continual sordid anxiety of their livelihood, nor if they are ill-housed, nor if they are deprived of all enjoyment of the natural beauty of the world, nor if they have no amusement to quicken the flow of their spirits from time to time. All these things, which touch more or less directly on their bodily condition, are born of the claim I make to living good health." So here we have a very clear, holistic concept, and I hope you can begin to see how what you're all doing connects to the way I think about public health. I'm going to use the rest of the time to go on a sort of perambulation, really, but come back to some key issues. One of the most influential figures in public health in the post-war period has been a man called Archie Cochrane, long since dead, but some of you will have heard of the Cochrane collaborations, which are about evidence-based healthcare. Archie was a rather delightful, eccentric bachelor who lived in South Wales and drove a vintage Rolls Royce and had a penchant for expensive claret. But he did some of the best work that showed the relationship of the dust diseases in the coal miners in the valleys. He wrote a little book towards the end of his career, which led to the evidence-based medicine movement, and it was called Effectiveness and Efficiency, Random Reflections on the NHS. It's only about 80 pages, but it was a very influential book. And at the beginning of that, Archie talks about meeting a crematorium worker. And the crematorium worker said to him how amazed he always was by how much went in and how little came out. And Archie said to him, "Have you ever thought of getting a job in the NHS?" which is currently running at about £110 billion a year, and we still don't know what impact that investment has on the population's health. We know we have measures of activity, but we don't have measures of outcome. We have measures of output, but we don't have measures of outcome. We don't know what the effect is. But what I was taking from my keynote here is the random reflections on public health and the outdoor sector, so if you'll bear with me. The changing nature of health since the days of William Morris, we're all familiar with. This amazing phenomenon of the very large numbers of people who are now living into their 80s and 90s. I mean, it only began in the 1970s, really. Very large numbers of people now living into their 80s and 90s. We all grew up, those of us who are old enough, with the concept of, 80 years and 10. But the expectation of life continues to increase. Each decade it's increasing by a couple of years at least. But there are huge variations in that, massive differences in life expectancy between different social groups and different social areas. 20 years difference in Cumbria, where I was working last, 20 years difference between some wards and other wards in life expectancy. Massive difference in people's well-being between areas and in terms of their long-term conditions. The definition of an optimist is someone who hasn't heard the bad news yet, but we're all of us going to finish up with long-term conditions of one kind or another. Some of us in this room already will have them. I have raised cholesterol, I've got controlled blood pressure, I've got type 2 diabetes. These are things which will impact on all of us to a greater or lesser extent. But one of the things that we learn is that death is inevitable, but premature death, a lot of it, is avoidable. And a lot of long-term conditions are avoidable. And it brings us to really try to understand how physical and mental health interact towards well-being, and in terms of WHO, dying young as old as possible, keeping fit till you fall off the perch. And how do you create those conditions for people to keep fit till they fall off the perch? So I think we have to recognise that the task that faces us is to create conditions and environments that support healthy living. Prevention and participation are key words in the modern public health lexicon. I mean, prevention always has been, but historically public health was very paternalistic, it was very top-down, it was very much based on legislation and enforcement about environmental conditions and so on. Today it's much more complex. We have to take people with us on a journey where they are able to play their own part in maintaining their own health. And I would argue that your sector, as rich as it is, has a key part potentially to play in that. I mean, the more I become aware of your sector, the richer I see it is, and the tentacles reach out into so many areas that impact on public health. I had a phone call when I was regional director of public health for the Northwest for 13 years, and they dragged me into the medical civil service when they abolished the regional health authorities. So for about 10 years I was a medical civil servant, which was an interesting position for someone like me to occupy. But I took a phone call from David Clark, who some of you will know, Lord David Clark. He was David Clark MP for South Shields for many years, and Lord Clark of Windermere began life as a forester and finished up in the Lords as chairman of the Forestry Commission, which was a beautiful piece of poetry. And he phoned me up one day when I was regional director, and he said, "John, we've got several million acres under wood and open space and we think we've got a role to play in public health, but we don't know what it is. Can you come and talk to the board, please? So I went to dinner with the board and we had a very good conversation. This is probably nearly 15 years ago now. But it led me, ever since then, to reach out and make these connections. So I made connections working in Cumbria, worked closely with the Lake District National Park, with Richard Leaf, who some of you will know. It's like Lord Brain. You have to be a brain surgeon if your family name's Brain, don't you? If you're Leaf, you've got to be involved in outdoors stuff. There's your predestination. We actually had a very good meeting, and one of the people who was there here this morning is indicating when, as a result of the discussions we had with Richard, my chief executive of the Faculty of Public Health that I'm president of, we were invited to the annual get-together of the chairman and chief execs of all the national parks in Tenby a few months ago to talk about what's the potential role of the national parks in public health. Let's think about that one as a strategic question. How pervasive could the contribution be if there was a systematic approach to enabling people to participate in the national parks? One of the things I discovered when I was in Cumbria was I went to see the Outward Bound folk at Ullswater for a chat. One of the things I've always done in my life is cold call people and go and say, I think we've probably got some things we should be doing together, but I don't know what they are. And it was what Lord Clark taught me, really, I suppose. I went to see the Outward Bound at Ullswater, and I was rather shocked to discover that such a high proportion of the young people who go on Outward Bound courses in the Lake District are actually from the southeast, and very often from independent schools in the southeast, and that the level of participation among working class kids from West Cumbria in their own county, in the Outward Bound, is very low. I was getting off the train yesterday at Oxenholme, and there were a group of lads with a youth worker, looking a bit tired, with their rucksacks, and I went and had a coffee. There's a rather nice artisan bread and coffee place at Oxenholme Station these days, and I had a chat with them and asked them what they were doing, where they'd been. They'd been camping and walking in the Lake District, and they were from London, and they were of different ethnic backgrounds, and this was the first time they'd been out into the countryside. There were boys of about 12, 13, 14, a group of about 8 of them. I asked them how much they'd enjoyed it, and they said they had. I said, would you do it again? They said yes. So, it's refreshing to see that, but when you realise the extent of the deficit of access that's there, we've got a huge mountain to climb if we want to facilitate the universal access to these wonderful resources that we have. While I was working in Cumbria, I got a couple of hobby horses. I normally get hobby horses, but the Cumbria hobby horses were basically, having thought about the Outward Bound question, because I sent my own kids on Outward Bound when they were teenagers, when I thought about that, I thought, there are 5,000 births a year in Cumbria. 5,000. 5,000 is not a big number. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I was involved in a conference on looked after children some years ago. And looked after children have the most disastrous statistics and outcomes you could ever imagine in your life. Most women in the sex industry have been in care. Most of the lads in Young Offenders Institute have been in care. A high proportion of young people who've run away from home and living on the streets have been in care. We had a conference about them, and we talked about an initiative that Bernardo's have, a very good initiative that Bernardo's have. But I asked somebody from one particular borough, I won't say which borough it was, how many young people leave care each year? I think the answer was 34. Okay, 34. You scale that up by 140 boroughs across the country. You know, it's several thousand, it's probably 5,000. My mental arithmetic's quick enough for me. A year leaving care. But at a borough level, 34. If we can't sort that out together, we shouldn't be drawing our salaries. You know, it requires a joined-up approach to giving those young people who are among the most needy in the country the sort of experience and rites of passage that will enable them to enter adult life with a fair chance of floating. And I would suggest, and I know that from the conference I attended in the Lakes some months ago, that some of you are involved with that kind of work. I mean, that's part of your story. I came to the conclusion, to come back to my hobby horse, that all we need in Cumbria is 5,000 passions. Just one passion each. You know, by the time they leave school, you want each child to be passionate about something that's not going to get them into trouble and will help them make their way. Now, you are custodians of passions. You know, you are. You have a key role to play in facilitating access to passions of these young people. I also had this thought. One of my lads went out with a girl years ago from Millfield, and I discovered that at Millfield, which is like an expensive comprehensive school, that they have a very large number of after-hours clubs, huge numbers of after-hours clubs. I mean, you know, more than dozens, different things. And I know from my own experience, because I have a young child, as well as a grown-up one, who's at an independent school, the range of stuff that's available. And you go to a school in a disadvantaged inner city area or rural area or coastal area, and you see what's on offer after school. And, you know, it's just not fair. So the challenge is, why can't the ones that have got all these clubs, the sailing and the climbing and the skiing and all the other stuff that's going on, why can't they twin up with the other ones and help them get cracking? Why can't we have some solidarity? Why can't we develop a way to make those connections, to release those resources for the ones that really need to have access to it? How do we create the pathways from the west coast of Cumbria, from your Barrow and your Workington and your Whitehaven and your Maryport, and how do we create those pathways for those kids who are stranded on that coastal strip with poor communications and poor aspirations, to give them tasters and opportunities and access to the national park, which is on their doorstep, the forestry estate, which is on their doorstep, and all of the opportunities which are potentially there, that will be life-changing. How do we create those opportunities? Now, I said this would be random reflections. And I know Andy said to me, he said, you know, these are outdoors types. So he said to me when I came, he said, they're outdoors types, you know. He said, you can't expect them to sit still for very long. I mean, they want to. He said, you've got to throw some questions at them or get them to do something. I've been spending the last few weeks with some very different kind of outdoors types, actually. I've been involved with selecting the NHS volunteers to go to Sierra Leone. That's what I've been doing for a lot of the time for the last 3 weeks. I've been sat in Manchester or in London doing long telephone interviews with volunteers. We've had 700 people so far volunteer to go to Sierra Leone, doctors and nurses. And they're remarkable people. You know? You see, I find it very moving. These people are prepared to put themselves at risk for other people. They're very action-oriented people. Doctors and nurses who like to get their hands dirty but keep them clean in that environment that they're going to. You know what I mean? Their CVs are amazing, these people. They've done all kinds of really interesting things. They've not followed a linear career path at all, most of them. You know, they've not stayed close to the desk and never gone to sea in the hope of being ruler of the Queen's Navy. But they've actually gone off, they've done VSO, they've gone and worked in development, they've worked in villages in India, they've done stuff. They haven't followed a straight career path, got all their badges, got all their certificates, got their special, they've got eclectic mixes of experience. And they put themselves forward. And they, you know, they would really are impatient to get out there and get stuck in. Incredible. But at the same time, to deal with the challenge of what's facing us in West Africa, we've got to have people who are sitting behind desks, thinking, planning, plotting, sorting out logistics. You know, the army are out there at the moment building field hospitals, isolation units, and so on. But to get the laboratory capacity up to scratch requires a lot of logistic thinking and planning. You know, you can't just send people off to be a risk without doing all that stuff behind the scenes. At my age, and with my atrophied clinical skills, but with a lot of experience of dealing with people, the contribution I can make is to help to select the ones who are going to go. So, I want to make an analogy here with, a disaster response. A long time ago, when the situation blew up in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia, I went on a training course to be deployed, but I didn't go in the end because I had 3 children under 5 and it wasn't a popular idea domestically. But I did a week's course in deployment for the camps there, and what I learned about that was that if you've got 12,000 women and children in a refugee camp in the Horn of Africa, there are no men because men will be off fighting somewhere, and you drop in a humanitarian team, you don't immediately set up a field clinic and start treating sick babies. The first thing you do is a census of the people in the camp and an assessment of what skills they've got. You find out what resources you've got so that you can mobilise them. Because you'll have people who've got nursing skills, you'll have people who've got teaching skills, you'll have people who are good at organising the kids to play football or whatever. You'll have people who can do the mechanical work and the navying and doing the sanitation and all the rest of it. So the first thing you do is you have to do a census. Now, John McKnight, who I'm going to see next week actually, we're going to America early tomorrow morning. It's half term, and going to go and see John. He's a guru, a mentor of mine. He worked for 40 years in Chicago, developing asset-based community development, known as ABCD, capitals. If you Google abcdinstitute.org, you'll find all this stuff. abcinstitute.org. And John is, he looks like an Old Testament prophet. He came from a family that were Covenanters on the west coast of Scotland generations ago and turned up in the States. And they trained community organisers, and he trained Obama as a community organiser for 3 years. After he'd done his first degree, he trained as a community organiser. And one of the things John McKnight says is you don't go to the shop till you've seen what you've got in your own backyard. You know? Asset-based community development. Map the assets. Now, we are asset-rich. Even in the most disadvantaged community, there are assets. Part of the problem, though, is that we have professionals who go in and don't build the capacity or build on the capacity that's already there. We emasculate communities the way we work. We don't build on their strengths by mapping the assets in the first place and seeing how to get alongside them. And that's the philosophy behind asset-based community development. And so, if the challenge is for all our young people, and not just all our young people, because I haven't started to scratch the surface of the aging story, 40% of widows depressed, 40% of widows depressed, at home, lonely, isolated. How do we make it possible for people to have a quality of life and a participating life, even when they're beginning to get those multiple things that go wrong with you as you get older? And I would suggest that your sector has a lot to say and to offer about that agenda as well. So, we have to... How am I doing? Come? No, how much longer have we got? 10, that's fine. Just need to try and calibrate. So we need to map the assets. Okay, we need to map the assets. We also need to go strategic. You see, and this is where Andy says, people get up in the air strategy. These are hands-on folk, But somehow, if we're talking about how your sector evolves and matures and delivers to its potential, then you need some strategic thinking in here as well. And I don't know whether you want to interrupt it. Andy said to me, give them some questions and have a break, you see, but I don't know. I think I'll carry on talking. Do you want me to give you some questions and have a break, or should I talk for 10 minutes and leave you with some questions to think about? Should I carry on talking? Yeah, okay. But what I want you to start thinking about, though, is what will this sector look like in 10 years' time? I want you to start thinking about what will this sector look like in 10 years' time. So, it's not a new sector. It's a sector that's been around a long time. I floated the concept up in the Northwest when we were talking there, which I stole. You shouldn't be in public health if you can't plagiarise. It's very important to plagiarise. Part of the big problem in the world today is people don't do things if somebody else thought of it first. It's not invented here, I'm not doing it. But my cousin, John Ashton, was the government's global ambassador for global warming until 2 years ago. And John's got a much bigger brain on him than I have. I've just, tried to make the most use of what I've got. He's got a big brain on him. But he came up with this thing which he formed with other ex-diplomats from around the world. He was in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. He's a scientist. Called E3G. You Google that, E3G. Environment of the Third Generation, E3G. And so he talks about the first generation of environmentalism, second generation of environmentalism, and the third generation of environmentalism. And the third generation of environmentalism is about getting those things, the sustainability and all of that stuff, onto everybody's agenda. It's really permeating everybody else. So there's a real parallel. That's what we need to do in public health. But I think that's where I think we need to start thinking about outdoors sector, third generation outdoors. What was first generation outdoors? First generation outdoors was Baden Powell. It was my mother and father. growing up in the 1910s and 1920s, becoming cubmistress and scoutmaster, and doing all that stuff. That was first generation kind of stuff, outdoors. And the Ramblers, and the Youth Hostel Association, and all those things. That was the first generation of outdoor stuff. The second generation was the national parks, the post-war settlement of building the structures and so on. And the twin objectives of the national parks and the Forestry Commission, I think we had that conversation, twin objectives. There's the heritage stuff, looking after it, keeping it nice, not letting people mess it up. But then there's the social objective, the social value, the participation, the enrichment of life. That's the health and well-being objective. But I think we now need to be in this third generation of outdoors, which is what you are. You are it. You are the cohort that can really move this on and make it meaningful to the whole population at whatever stage they are in the life cycle, and help to make that integration, which we so desperately need, between mental health and physical health. Who knows Winder? Winder. You don't know Winder. Winder is a hill. It's quite a serious hill. You know Winder? Yeah. You've run up it. Did you go to Sedbergh School? No. Winder is a serious hill next to Sedbergh School, which they get to run up quite a lot. And it's part of the Wilson Run, which has been going on at Sedbergh School for over 100 years, which is a fell run. It's about 12 miles long, very, very severe run, which all the kids are expected to do at least once before they finish school at the age of 18. But Winder is... I went up Winder on Saturday with a friend and colleague of mine, Phil Batty, who lives at the bottom of Winder. It took about an hour or so to get up and about 10 minutes to get down. And when you get to the top of Winder, you should go, because you can see right the way down, past Blackpool, down to Merseyside. You can see all the way across the Lake District. It's one of the most fantastic views, that there is really in that sense. But what we were talking about there is that Phil is the Vice President of the Faculty of Sports and Exercise Medicine of the Royal College of Physicians. So I'm the President of the Faculty of Public Health at the Royal College of Physicians. Phil's Vice President of the Faculty of Sports and Exercise Medicine. But what we were talking about was he would really like them, and he seems to have quite a body of support behind the idea, to broaden their scope from being about sporting excellence and sporting injury to mass participation. And there's always this tension, And I remember years ago, my three that are now long since grown up, going, do you remember Sport for All? Sport for All, the 1970s or 80s. Anyway, it's quite a while ago. And we used to, I lived in Southampton at the time, we always used to go to the baths up by Winchester on a Sunday morning with the kids. And we arrived one Sunday morning with the kids to go swimming to find that we weren't allowed in that day because they were having a Sport for All demonstration. So there was always this, this tension between, putting all the resources into securing gold medals in the Olympics versus putting the money into ensuring that everybody takes part in something. And Phil and I were talking about this as we went up Winder last Saturday, because the objective is more people, more active, more often. That's a public health objective. More people, more active, more often. It's simple, really. That's what we need to be. So, I said I'm going to draw to a close in a moment. So the challenge is, how do you do the strategic thinking? How do you connect to where you can scale up all of this stuff that you're doing? And so many of you just want to get on and do the thing you do and so on. But somebody needs to do the strategic thinking. So you've got to connect at the top level, at the policy level, across government. You've got to connect at the local administrative level, whether it's the county or the district or the city or whatever, or the borough or the parish or whatever, as well as getting on and doing, the day job. So I recognise, as I said, speaking with all these volunteers wanting to go to Sierra Leone, and you've got this tension between getting on doing and standing back and making sure the logistics are in place. You've got to do both. We have, if you have an emergency, if you have a disaster or an emergency, and you convene, the Chief Constable convenes a gold command, which is the way, the words we use, the terminology, some of you will be familiar with that. I suspect some of you are involved in mountain rescue. So. The gold command, they sit in a fancy room somewhere and just receive all the intelligence coming in and make high-level decisions about what's going to happen and try to anticipate what's going to happen next. They've got to do the thinking. They've got to be in a position to really assess it. And that's chaired by the Chief Constable, usually, with the heads of service, from health and fire and rescue, the other agencies. The silver guys, the silver level, are the ones who have to take away the instructions from that level to go and make it happen. And the bronze are the frontline Joes and Josephines who are doing the stuff on the ground, the ambulance men and women and so on, and the constables and so on and so on. And so I think that's a command and control structure in an emergency. But you could argue that the public health crisis that we face, of over 30% obesity, large proportion of unfit population, costing a large proportion of the NHS budget for avoidable things, requires a command and control solution. It's not fashionable, command and control, but I think you need to be thinking strategically and silver and bronze as you go forward. Finally, if you look at the natural history of businesses and enterprises, then they typically have a shape like an S the wrong way around, like that. See? And at the bottom, what you've got here is you've got a new business, and people can't get enough of it, whatever it is, product, and you've got lots of smaller outfits, and everybody's happy to help each other out. I'm just trying to think of an example. It could be people beginning to set up coffee bars or something like that. That might be a good example. And there might be lend a guy in the next village some coffee beans when they run out. Where we help each other out. So as it matures and you begin to get monopolisation and maturity of the market, people become less willing to help each other, and it tends to get monopolised and shrunk and all of that. Now, I recognise in your sector you've probably got bits of different points on that you've probably already got some professionalisation and consolidation and so on in the sector. But if you're going to grow this sector, I'm always reluctant to use market words for social enterprises. But if you're going to grow the sector, then the collaboration that you develop over the next 3, 5, 10 years will make a huge difference to your reach and your ability to impact on the nation's health and well-being.